It's 11 p.m. and these are the headlines. President chairs Council of Ministers meeting on Monday focused on social insurance bill and enhancing trade union work. France's political discourse fails to convince. Paris shifts its focus to foreign tensions, avoiding domestic challenges. Continued destruction of homes in Morocco sparks outrage over violations of fundamental rights. Welcome back, everyone. First of all, the President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and the Minister of National Defense, Abdelmajid Tebboune, chaired today a meeting of the Council of Ministers to discuss a draft law on social allocations as well as measures and arrangements for the holy month of Ramadan. At the beginning of the meeting, the Prime Minister presented an overview of the government's activities over the past 2 weeks, including updates on laws and projects. President Tebboune provided the following instructions and directives. First, regarding the draft law on social insurance extended maternity leave, the draft was approved affirming women's rights to equal salaries and benefits with men. President Abdelmajid Tebboune commended Algeria's significant progress in safeguarding women's rights, highlighting this project as one of its manifestations. He emphasized it as a national duty that does not discriminate between Algerian women and men, in line with the principles of the November Declaration and in recognition of their contributions during the War of Liberation. Regarding the joint ministerial presentation on preparations for the holy month of Ramadan, 2 points were highlighted, including the necessity to remain vigilant and cautious against attempts to disrupt market stability and abundance. Second, updating and intensifying systems while continuing the fight against speculation by enforcing the harshest legal penalties against any attempts to engage in such practices. On the presentation concerning the promotion of union activities and social dialogue, the President stressed that the right to union activity is guaranteed in Algeria and the state is committed to respecting it. He noted that the government itself needs strong representative unions to advance the labor sector, and the restructuring and adaptation of union organization under the new law should aim to enhance social dialogue across various sectors. Before concluding the meeting, the Council of Ministers approved an organic law concerning the jurisdiction, organization and functioning of the Court of Disputes, as well as law settling the 2022 fiscal year budget. Two presidential decrees on the Algerian-Jordanian cooperation in the fields of industry, tourism and social affairs were also endorsed. The Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of the national community abroad, Mr. Sofiane Shaib, held a meeting with his Tunisian counterpart, the Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Migration and Tunisians Abroad, Mr. Mohamed Ben Ayad, as part of his visit to Tunisia. During the meeting, the two parties emphasized the bonds of brotherhood and close cooperation between Algeria and Tunisia and the remarkable development that cooperation is witnessing in all fields, driven by the directives of the leaders of the two countries. The two sides discussed ways to enhance cooperation mechanisms in the field of mutual interest with the aim of keeping up with the dynamics of the bilateral relations. In this context, the two officials referred to the outcomes of the recent session of the Algerian-Tunisian Joint Commission held last month in Tunis, agreeing on the necessity of doubling efforts to find tangible solutions to some pending issues through the adaptation of follow-up roadmap based on specific timeline and preparation for upcoming bilateral events. In other news, and this story, we will hear from Roger Winterhalter, a French soldier's journey. He went from witnessing colonial oppression to joining the Algerian independence movement, driven by his commitment to justice and peace. Najah reports.
Roger Winterhalter, a French soldier, arrived to Algeria, precisely Tlerma region, in 1960, was quickly confronted with the harsh realities of the colonial system and the repressive practices of the French army. This exposure led him to recognize the injustice of the war.
Un jour,
One day an Algerian had been arrested and tortured, so he was hit by the French soldiers who had tortured him before. I was in the section that accompanied the prisoner when he came down, and one of them pushed him and he fell, and then another tripped him. I said to myself, this is unbelievable. Eventually there were demonstrations in commemoration of the hijacking of the 5 Algerian leaders' plane. In those demonstrations were thousands of the Algerian men, women and children. Many also descended from the mountains and chanted "Long live Algeria" and independence chants. They were unarmed, they were not threatening, they had flags, then they were all shot. That totally reversed my opinion.
Et puis on a tiré dessus, et ça m'a totalement renversé.
In his book, Si c'était à refaire, Roger recounts how he uncovered the presence of the FLN cell within the French barracks. Without hesitation, he chose to join the struggle of the Algerian people. There was a group of people I knew who were all Algerian riflemen in the French army. They represented themselves as a cell from the FLN in the French army, and my role was to falsify the names and the papers to about 19 people of this group. We could steal medicines also for the National Liberation Army.
Des médicaments pour l'armée de libération nationale.
Although he admits to forgetting certain details of his time in Algeria during the November Revolution, he insists that this pivotal period, which transformed him into a dedicated advocate for peace and right of people to self-determination, remains deeply ingrained in his memory.
Pour moi, je suis un militant né de la guerre d'Algérie.
And France is losing influence in Africa. The continent is against its colonial legacy, rejecting the arrogant speeches of the French authorities and reaffirming its desire to take its destiny into its own hands. Rania Al-Bahri.
A wind of change is blowing across Africa and in France's dominant influence. The continent is now at a pivotal moment in its history. For decades, many African countries suffered under French control, marked by the exploitation of resources, the erasure of identity and the oppression of people. But now Africans are rejecting all forms of submission. The political, economic and social changes show a collective desire to take control of their own future and assert their own sovereignty.
La France a été chassée de certains pays, notamment des pays.
France has been driven out of several countries, particularly in the Sahel and more recently in Chad. One might expect this to be a chance for President Macron to strengthen France's image in Africa, but that has not happened. Macron completely missed the point. Africans no longer want this kind of interference that has lasted for years, and they no longer want a paternalistic approach. They know France is there for its own interests, not theirs.
Unanimous condemnations firmly reject the positions taken by French authorities regarding African nations, whose people no longer tolerate the dismissive attitudes that ignore their history and aspirations.
We have reached a point where this disrespect can no longer be tolerated, either by African citizens or leaders. It's natural that there has been an outcry following President Macron's remarks.
This uprising against colonial France offers real hope for all African nations. It marks the start of a project based on freedom, rejecting all forms of domination and submission.
And France, facing severe domestic crises and mounting debt, is resorting to international provocation, media campaigns and colonial arrogance to switch attention from its international failures, while the African nations firmly reject its dominance. Najah Tayar.
To divert the French public opinion from domestic crisis, Paris is attempting to provoke international conflicts, unable to find effective solutions to the severe economic and financial crisis threatening its political and social stability. The French government faces mounting pressure. The far right has sought to exploit this crisis by meddling in African affairs and creating diplomatic tensions, aiming to distract public opinion and conceal the government's massive failures, particularly in its inability to address the colossal national debt exceeding 3,300 billion euros. France is going through one economic crisis after another, particularly in terms of the public budget for the year 2025, with a debt exceeding 3,000 billion euros. These difficulties have prompted the President Macron, through his successive governments, to adopt behaviors that could be described as inadequate in the face of global crisis. One might even think that the French president is deliberately seeking to provoke problems abroad to make people forget the serious domestic challenges facing France. The French decision-makers, driven by arrogance rooted in the colonial past and intensified by the far right, are using the media to launch malicious campaigns. These efforts reflect a desperate attempt to salvage the tarnished reputation of the declining Fifth Republic. An unprecedented media campaign led by media close to the far right has made immigrant Islam and Muslims the targets of their media policy. Although this campaign appears to be aimed at stigmatizing these groups, it has given rise to great incomprehension, all the more so as it is based on the generalizations that do not respect the principles of equality and non-discrimination enshrined in the French legislation. The African countries have delivered a clear message to their former colonial power. The era of domination is over. Sovereignty and respect for the positions of nations are fundamental principles that can no longer be overlooked.
And the General Directorate of Communication of the Presidency of the Republic extended its sincere condolences and expressed its deep sympathy to the family of the late Hamzawi bin Shuhra, correspondent of the newspaper West Info and La Nouvelle République in Tiaret, who died at the age of 67 after a long illness. Today, a framework agreement was signed at the Ministry of Industry between the Sidal Group and the Atomic Energy Authority to cooperate in producing radiopharmaceuticals used for diagnosing serious diseases. This partnership is expected to strengthen the country's capabilities in nuclear medicine and improve healthcare for citizens.
Algeria is taking a significant step to strengthen national sovereignty in the pharmaceutical industry by producing radioactive isotopes used in nuclear medicine. This move will ensure modern treatment, especially when it comes to diagnosing and treating cancer.
This project is very important as there is a large shortage in Algeria. With God's willing, this partnership will allow the availability of this product in our country.
The project is the result of cooperation between the Sidal Group and the Atomic Energy Authority. It will help reduce import costs and improve both health and economic independence.
This agreement is a decisive step toward achieving our national goal of using science and technology to support public health and sustainable development. This partnership, built on a shared vision, opens up great opportunities. It helps strengthening our health independence while developing a competitive and sustainable pharmaceutical industry. This agreement is part of the strategic development plan launched by Sidal Group to produce radiopharmaceutical products. It aims to meet the national demand for radioactive isotopes and radiopharmaceutical preparations.
The project will be a milestone in the pharmaceutical and nuclear medicine fields, paving the way for a better medical care and progress in the health sector.
In other news, and far from responding to the basic needs of its people, the Mahsen regime violated once again fundamental human rights by brutally evicting people out of their homes, an arbitrary measure that will further increase social tension. Melissa Kibash.
In addition to all the unjust and inhuman practices committed by the Mahsen, it is now evicting citizens out of their own houses. According to the inhabitants of Douar Anqal Jmal, they are being forced to leave their homes after receiving eviction notices.
We are now homeless. They obliged us to leave our houses without taking into consideration our financial situation nor our families.
People don't have means to move out. Look at the state of these houses. They're barely holding. These eviction operations are unfair and brutal.
Arbitrary decisions is the strategy adopted by the Makhzen and is the fuel that feeds the anger of citizens.
Where are we going to live? There's around 900 houses here. These people are homeless now. Rent is expensive. It's no less than 2,000 dirhams per month, and people can't afford it.
I have 2 kids to feed and I have no money to rent a shelter. They sent us an eviction notice with 4 days as a deadline. I don't know what to do.
Forcibly evicting people is a deeply unjust practice as it violates fundamental human rights. Such action will only arouse the anger of citizens, especially those affected.
To the occupied Palestinian territories now, 6 civilians were martyred and more than 30 others were injured today's evening due to an airstrike by Zionist occupation forces on a residential area in Gaza City. 2 citizens were also martyred and others injured when the occupation forces targeted a group of civilians near Anwar School, sheltering displaced people in the Nasser neighborhood in the west of Gaza City. Medical sources reported that the number of martyrs since the early hours of today has risen to more than 50. With temperatures dropping, winter has fully embraced several provinces in the central and eastern regions of our country. Algeria, case in point Sétif, which is now glistening under a soft white veil of snow. These captivating images from Sétif bring a serene close to tonight's news. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.